All right, very good. Okay, so the idea, like we said on Tuesday, is that once we've implemented the system, we need to govern it. We need to govern it, right? Meaning we need to make sure that we have a proper smooth running system. Yeah, we need governance to make sure that the system is meeting the objectives of the organization, running economically, running reliably, running smoothly, it's running legally, right? Because especially in places like Europe, everywhere. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, Europe introduced something called GPDR, right? Who heard about GPDR? GDPR. Okay, so if you know enough to correct the professor about what it is, then what is it? See? Oh, well, yeah, but you told me it's the wrong sequence of letters. So tell us what the letters mean then. You mean you know what the sequence, but not what the letters mean? Oh, enough to correct the professor, but all right. General data protection regulation or something like that. Let's see what GDPR means. Something to that effect. Don't worry too much about it. It's the protection of consumer data, right? It's the idea that if you have a system that collects consumer data, you need to be very strict about how you collect it. You need to protect it. You need to protect their privacy. You need to protect them from harm. Everybody with me? That's what GDPR is. No, it's not that. USA doesn't have its own set of things like HIPAA, FERPA, yeah, especially in education and in health, right? The FCA, Federal Communications people, they regulate data protection, right? And they also have their own set of stuff that regulates what can be done with data, how to protect it, how to keep it, how to store it, how to share it, etc., right? All right. So let's talk about security and governance. So governance protects the stakeholders in the use of the system, yeah? You can think of governance kind of like the Road Traffic Act laws, right? In Jamaica, we have the Road Traffic Act. I think you have similar thing in India, Road Traffic Act. What's it called in India? The laws that govern, they regulate, govern how vehicles drive on the road. What's it called in India? All right, never mind. Anyway, so yeah, so it protects the stakeholders, right? Ensures the system supports the organizational goals and strategy. We don't want a system that's just running and it's not delivering what it's supposed to deliver in terms of the organization's goals and strategy. All right. Make sure that the system runs in a sustainable economic way, right? So meaning there's not too much time and effort spent maintaining the system. It's not creating lawsuits, right? From data breaches, right? Data privacy breaches, right? People know how to use the system properly, right? They're protecting the system, all this type of stuff. And of course, very importantly, ensures that the users have a smooth running system. Yeah. Because people don't want to use a system. People are not going to be productive. Your best workers are not going to be productive if the system isn't running properly, isn't running smoothly, right? Isn't doing what it's supposed to do. When I go onto Canvas, yeah, I want to be able to create an assignment the way I need to create it, grade the way I need to grade, right? I don't want to come to class and I can't access the attendance, take attendance, etc. All that, right? Ensures data is protected from misuse. We're protecting our clients, our customers, our employees, or students or patients' data. Very, very important, right? Governance. And we're meeting our legal and economic requirements. Okay, security. So, like as we started to say on Tuesday, security is all about technical system controls, right? So there's two big parts to security and governance. One is the technical part where we control what people can do, when they can do it, what they can do, who can do it, when they can do it, right? Those are system controls, right? So you have the security part. That's the technical controls that force people to use the system only in a certain way that is allowed. But just because you're limiting the way people use the system doesn't mean they can't abuse it, right? Like I said on Tuesday, like we're talking about on Tuesday, I have access to your data, right? Oh, actually, very interesting, very interesting. There was so for example, there was a case probably 10 years ago. This traffic cop, he saw this lady, right? And she was speeding. So he gave her a speeding ticket, right? Looked up her address, um, look, made sure that the address on the license was the address on the ticket, right? Etc., right? Gave her the traffic ticket. So that's what is allowed. That's what he's allowed to do with the system, yeah? What he was not allowed to do with the system was to look up her address, visit her, and leave a note inviting her to dinner. See, that's a problem. That's a big problem. There's a guy, yeah. So he actually left a note saying, I'm the cop who gave you the ticket, and I feel bad about it, and I want to invite you to dinner to make up for it, right? Of course, there was a lawsuit against him, against the department, and it was big national news. So that's abuse of power, right? It's an abuse of what the system is supposed to allow him to do, right? So for example, I have access to all your addresses. Did you know that? I have access to all your phone numbers and addresses. Yeah? But I'm allowed to use that only in serving you according to my job description. Everybody with me? So for example, I don't see you turn up. I can call you, I say, listen. Well, I wouldn't visit your house, right? But I'd call you, I say, listen, it's too many people in this class though. But like when I was teaching in Savannah, Georgia, I would call people, especially when they start off good and then they just fall off. I'd call them and say, listen, what's happening? You're still in the class, you're still in the course. What's wrong? Can I help you with anything? This type of thing, right? You're allowed to do stuff like that, right? But you're not allowed to sell people's addresses to book vendors. Say, okay, this is where they live. This is their phone number. This is their email address. Send them emails, giving them incentives to buy your textbooks. Yeah. And then now give me 5% of the book sales, right? Obviously, if I'm going to give out people's addresses, I'm going to get something out of it, right? I would just give out the address just like that. At least I'm going to try to get something out of it. Yeah. So that I'm not allowed to do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So there's things I'm allowed to do and things I'm not allowed to do, right? So the problem though is that there are things that I'm allowed to do which require access to the system and certain kinds of data in the system. But then it's up to me not to use that data improperly, like this traffic cop did, right? So governance is both system security, regulating what people do, but it's also agreements between the users, such as myself, right? It's agreements that people like myself sign to say, I will not abuse the system to do other things which are outside of my job. Everybody with me? Everybody with me? So governance covers the whole thing. Yeah. It includes the technical controls, and it also covers the agreements. And we'll talk about, as we talked about on Tuesday, we'll talk about end user licensing, terms of use, acceptable use policy, privacy policy, all of that good stuff, right? All right, so system controls. So like we said, it's basically who can access the system. So if you have a Blackboard login, right, that means you're an authorized user. But then it's also what you can do on the system, what can be done on the system, right? So for example, teaching can, grading can happen on the system. You can submit homeworks, you can grade homeworks, you can view feedback, right? And then it also is who can do the things that can be done, right? Because in other words, you're going to have different types of users on the system. You're going to have teachers, you're going to have students. So system security basically covers those three things, right? But remember, you know, security doesn't cover everything because you can have access to data, which you need to do your job, but which can be misused in some other ways, right? So you need to have training. So two big things is training. Well, there's a personal aspect of it, which is hire good people, right? Hiring good people with integrity, people who can self what? That was too quick, you know. That was too. You're waiting to say that. Yeah, man. You hire people who can self-regulate, right? You train them on proper use of the system, right? So when you get your first, I'm sure you've done user training in India, right? Those of you who had jobs in terms of secure use of the system and all that type of stuff, right? All right, very good. And then when you get your job in the United States, right? When you get your job, now people, like I said, the elections were causing uncertainty. Now that the elections are over, I'm pretty sure a lot of jobs are going to start rolling, right? Doesn't matter who won, you know. What matters is that we pass that phase of uncertainty. Yeah. Did I tell you guys the cancer story? Anyway, that's another time. I did tell you, but we'll come back to it. All right. So that's security, right? And of course, we'll go more into that in 6410, right? So we control things like access, the people who are authorized to use the system. Once you get a job, typically, you're going to sign up some forms indicating that you're going to respect the way the system should be used and respect the policies, etc., 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 right? Then your supervisor who hired you is going to sign up some forms, and that's going to give you access to the system, right? And then once you've been given access to the system, you're going to get a login, right? And then that, of course, is your username and password. Then, of course, you have roles. Roles are based, typically, we don't administer security by giving specific people access to specific systems. Typically, what we have is we have access rights on data, access right on programs. Then we give those access rights to what we call roles. Anybody know the difference between a role and a user? We talked about it on Tuesday as well. What's the difference between a role and a user? What's a role on the system, right? A role is a security thing. What's the difference between a role and a user? So a role is a container, is like a group of users. And that group of users has access to different features on the system, right? So for example, you'll have the teacher role, the professor role, the instructor role, right? And then instead of assigning the rights to things like grading, and of course, GAs, right? Graduate assistant, teaching assistant, right? These are all roles on the system. Yeah. Instructor, grader, etc. So you have these roles on the system. Jesus Christ. I'm going to send out both of you next time. All three of you. Okay, okay. Right. So you have those roles. Teacher, instructor, professor, right? They call it different things in different systems, right? And then users are put into those roles. Yeah. So instead of adding the ability to grade to 1,000 people, what you do is you put 1,000 people into that role and then you administer the rights that are given to that role, right? So rights give. It's kind of like, okay, it's kind of like being a citizen or a resident or you have, in a country, you have a citizen, you have a resident, you have people with work permits. Then you have visitors, right? And so, of course, citizens automatically have the rights to vote. Residents have the right to, you have rights to like unemployment benefits, right? Then somebody who has a work permit has the right to work, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you don't like give every single person the specific rights that they need. You give it to the roles, and then you assign people to the roles, right? All right, security policy. So normally you're going to have a security policy, yeah? And that security policy is going to address a bunch of things in the organization. So when you implement a system, you have to have a security policy, yeah? And it's going to address a couple of things. One of the big things is passwords, of course, right? The strength of your password, right? How often you should change it, whether or not you can reuse old passwords, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, you're gonna have your password policy. Then, of course, you're gonna typically have security training. Some people do, some systems, and it depends from organization to organization, right? But most organizations, you will do security training every 6 months or every year. And typically, you'll go through things like they'll train you how to spot phishing scams. Yeah. So when you get emails and they're asking you to click on a certain link to prevent your email account from being disabled, okay, this is a phishing scam. And if you click on it, it's going to activate some virus, which is going to infect the network, which is going to make life hard for all the people on the system, right? And then typically you're going to have your personal policy, right? Which is the responsibility of policies of a person to get training, to do the right things, to keep their account secure, to not share your passwords, not share your accounts, not let people use your account to do different things, right? Like I know some students actually allow their friends to upload homework on their behalf and this kind of thing. Of course, that's not allowed, right? All right, so you have your security policy. You have your privacy policy. And like we said, that's what data is collected from users. Yeah. So users must be able to tell what data is collected about them, right? And on Tuesday, we visited Facebook. We visited Facebook on Tuesday. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. So so on Tuesday we looked at Facebook, and we saw that when you go to Facebook, sign up, they have their policy, right? Yeah, so you have a privacy policy. And that's, like we said, it's going to tell you what data is collected. Yeah, people have that right. And so privacy policy is something that people never read it. You're supposed to read all through. And then typically, all right, take for example, you have some systems. You have to click a box indicating that you agree with the privacy policy. Yeah. But here, they're simply saying, by clicking, you agree. You bother with me? By clicking, you have agreed. If you don't want to read it, that's your problem. Just read up to you. Some people, when you're signing up, they will show the privacy policy, right? Or the terms of use. And they'll say, and you have to scroll through it and read it. And the assumption is that as you're scrolling through it, you're reading it, right? But of course, all of us, myself included, we simply scroll to the bottom, right? And click the box. And of course, the next button is disabled until you've scrolled all the way to the bottom, right? And of course, it's 20 pages, but everybody takes 5 seconds to scroll all the way to the bottom. And we know nobody can read 20 pages in 5 seconds, but they allow you to click next anyway, because it's really your problem if you want to click next without reading it. But legally, they're covered, right? All right, very good. Legally, they're covered, right? So yeah, so their privacy policy talks about what data they're collecting, right? In this case, your activity, your likes, shares, comments. And this is just as a side note. They said that the internet has a very, very long memory. Can I share a secret with you guys? Who wants to hear a secret? Anybody want to hear a secret? So it turns out that after this election, right? I'm actually going to go ahead and actually delete a lot of. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete a lot of posts, right? That I made. I'm not going to get any more specific than that, right? And delete a lot of content that I posted and comments, and maybe I'll just hide out all my social media altogether, right? I'm thinking some of those things that I said might come back to haunt. Now, again, I'm not being specific here, right? But the point is, you know, when you post stuff, you want to remember that the internet has a very long memory. And there's actually websites, there's actually companies that collect the data. So even if you delete it, they're still storing it. Now, you want to hope that, for example, you want to hope that they're not going to use it to persecute you because you said something about somebody you don't like. You know, you want to hope they don't, you know, use that against you and go after people because, oh, you know, you said this thing against me, blah, blah, blah. You want to hope that. But there's no guarantee. So like I say, I'm going to be deleting a lot of stuff that I posted in the past, right? But in my case, I posted stuff about my beliefs, what I believe, right? About my principles, about what I think is good, what I think is bad, right? So in a sense, you know, when you stand up for stuff, you know, you have to be willing to be, of course, my sisters totally disagree. They think I should just keep my mouth shut, right? But yeah, before the elections, I had a very big mouth. But now that the elections are over, I think I'm going to delete a lot of that stuff. But the point though is, you know, sometimes you have to stand up for your beliefs, even if it doesn't work out sometimes. However, there's another side of it. There's a side where you just do foolish stuff on the internet. You just say foolish stuff. It's not that you're standing up for something. You're just saying foolishness, right? Or you're posting pictures that don't make sense, right? Pictures that make you look stupid, right? Like there's a certain group of people. I thought a certain group of people who they would post a lot of pictures of them being drunk on the internet. And then of course, yeah, that's gonna come back and haunt you later in life, right? You know, you being drunk, you being passed out drunk, blackout drunk, as they call it, right? Don't make sense. You're gonna look stupid later on. The other side of it, of course, is people who have said, for example, things that are like racist, right? And then they regret it later on when they run for office, right? And then, you know, so you have different categories of things that you shouldn't, that may cost you on the internet. And like I said, the internet has a very long memory. So if you're going to say something that's going to cost you, at least try to say it because you're standing up for some principle, right? Not because you're just being foolish and you're just exposing yourself to, you know, to looking stupid. Everybody does that make sense to people? Does that make sense to anybody? Feel like I don't want the crowd today at all. I don't know. All right. Anyway, don't worry about it. All right. How do we use your information? That's going to be in the privacy policy, right? Typically, it's going to indicate some benefit of collecting the data, some reason why you need to collect the data, right? We visited Amazon on Tuesday and we looked at the way Amazon will personalize their suggestions, their recommendations for things that you should shop for, right? Based on the data they've collected, et cetera, right? It normally includes how they share the data, right? Yeah, right? So they share it. And of course, Meta owns, what does Meta own? Let me see if this class is awake or everybody's asleep. Meta, what are the companies that they own? Facebook, all right, we knew about that. What else? Instagram, what else? WhatsApp, what else? Well, that's all I know for now. But the point is, and of course, they're developing large language models. They're developing AIs. Yeah. And of course, they're using your information to develop these artificial intelligences as well. All right, very cool. Normally, it should also cover things like how to check what is stored about you. Yeah. So for example, on Google, you can actually find the recordings that Google has made of your voice, right? Typically of the times that it activated when you said, okay, Google, blah, 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 right? Etc. So all of that comes under privacy policy. And typically how it can be viewed and corrected. Yeah. So you should have an opportunity for your users to view their data and have it corrected in case there's anything that's wrong. Like, for example, did you know that? Okay, forget about me knowing your address. Do you know that your address is on the internet? Every single place I've lived in the US is on the internet. Did you know you can find every single address I've had in the US? Right? Because you have these people called data brokers and they collect your data. Guess where they get your data from? Where they get your data from? Yeah, people like Facebook, social media, the government, banks, credit card companies, etc., right? This all sell your data, right? And that's part of that should all be covered on the data use policy. Yeah. Privacy policy, etc., etc. So yeah, you can actually find every place I've lived. No, interestingly, my sisters are a triple. My sisters are a special case. Every time I tell my sister, I met this lady, right? I have this one sister. She's a dentist in Florida, right? She say, "What's her name?" Right? Guess what she does? Guess what my sister does? Hmm? She goes and looks up the lady's profile, right? She does background checks and everything, right? I tell you, I'm the youngest brother, right? I'm the youngest of 11. Darius, did you know I was the youngest of 11? You didn't know that. Learn stuff about me every day. Youngest of 11, right? My mom died when I was 3. My sisters took great care of me. My 7 sisters, fantastic care. Now they think they own me, unfortunately, right? That's what happens when your sisters take so much care of you. They basically own you, right? Um, my sister called me 2 days ago. She said, David, don't open your mouth, right? She said, David, keep your mouth shut, right? I might or might not edit this out. All right, but anyway, but the point is that so yeah, so so like my latest girlfriend, she's from Vietnam, right? And my sister, of course, they had to meet her. They had to meet her. She and my oldest sister, she's the third oldest. So of course they had to meet her, ask her a whole heap of questions. Of course, they have the background checks on her, all kind of thing. They're looking for criminal record and everything, right? That's my sister's for you. But yeah, All of that is related to privacy policy and data use and how your data is shared, right? No, by the way, privacy is basically dead. It's just a little bit of personal philosophy. Privacy is basically dead. Everybody knows everything about you, right? Just assume that, right? But the difference is whether they can use it in court. That's what privacy really means these days. Private data means they can't use it legally, but trust me, they know it, right? And they're using it unofficially. So, if you do stuff that, don't really make sense, people will know, right? But yeah. All right. I want to say one last thing. I'm going to do a lot of editing on this thing before I post it. You should know that, speaking of data and privacy, that you guys, we have no electronic privacy, right? You knew that? You already knew that? Okay. All right. People like the NSA, National Security Agency, the people with the wiretaps, right? They're not allowed to tap the phones of US citizens. But they tap the phones of all, they can tap a foreigner's phone, right? You already knew all this. So your text messages, emails, voice calls, WhatsApps. Yeah, they're all monitored, right? Y'all knew this until you become a US citizen. So it includes me because I'm a green card holder, but I'm still not a US citizen. So I can't vote. And I'm still subject to all of that wiretapping. So in other words, well, they can tap the phone of a US citizen if they have a warrant. But without a warrant, they can just arbitrarily tap anybody's phone who is a foreigner. Visitor, work permit, green card, F1 student, everybody, right? So just bear all of this in mind, right? Very good. Might end up just not posting this at all. Anyway, all right, very good. Acceptable use policy deals with how and what employees are allowed to use the system for. Yeah. It usually, you have to agree that you're going to use it securely, not share your password, not use your account to leak private information, not share company secrets, all of this good stuff, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you normally have some kind of responsibility to report problems with the system. When we talked about service level agreements with system uptime, percent of system uptime, system downtime, percent on duration. Remember that you can have different types of system downtime, meaning that, like we said, two systems can be up 99% of the times, but they still have different types of downtime. The 1% might be stretched over I'm sorry if I'm letting my personal feelings out too much today, but I don't know. What can I tell you? I'm a human being. It is what it is, right? It is what it is. Anyway, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, all right. System uptime percentage. Okay, so normally when you have a system, for example, that is in a hospital, or if you're facing customers on the internet, yeah, then normally, of course, you want the system to be up a lot, yeah. But in terms of system downtime, the percentage is different from the duration. In some cases, you may want a system that is only down for seconds at a time, so that by the time the user checks back, the system is up. Yeah. So even if it's down only for a few seconds at a time, right? It's not down for a whole stretch. And so the amount of time that it's down is also important. And your service level agreement with the person who provides your say for example, you're on the cloud. You have your system being hosted on the cloud. then you probably have a service level agreement which says what percentage of the time system must be up and the maximum amount of time that it should be down, right? Then of course you have system responsiveness in terms of how fast the system should respond. You want screens to load within 5 seconds, 1 second. You may have specific screens that you say, okay, all of these screens must load in this certain amount of time, etc., right? Gonna have your problem reporting procedures. So for example, if your system is down, who should the problem be reported to, etc. You're gonna also have what you call severity categories of severity, right? So for example, when problems happen so that you can use the system, normally there are categories. So for example, you have categories like that relate to, inconvenience. If the system is a little bit slow, then that's one category. Yeah. You report it, okay, instead of 5 seconds, the screens are loading in 10 seconds. That's one category. But you also have levels of severity up to when the business is at a stop. So meaning nothing can happen. We can't conduct our business. So for example, last year summer, there was a denial of service attack on Blackboard. Yeah. That time we're still using Blackboard. And so, of course, nobody could use Blackboard. And of course, that's the most severe level of problem. Yeah. Now, when you do Info 6410, which is info security, then you learn more about denial of service attacks, where a hacker floods the server with illegitimate requests to force everybody to stop using the system, right? Basically, you're flooding the server with so many HTTP requests that the system can't respond to the legitimate users. Yeah. And so that happened one day last summer with Blackboard, right? So yeah, you have different levels of severity and also the procedures for escalating based on the level of severity. So in other words, you have this person you call when the system is slow, this person you call when the system is not usable, etc., right? And then finally, you have dispute resolution. In other words, if there is a problem between the client, which is the organization, and the service provider who is hosting the system, then how do we resolve that problem? All right. Finally, let's talk about terms of use. Terms of use typically are customer facing. Yeah, terms of use. In the case of Facebook, we have, what's called terms. Facebook sign up. And they simply call it the terms. Yeah. Terms of service, right? Terms of service, terms of use, right? And basically, it's basically how you're allowed to use it. Yeah. And that typically, you can't use Facebook if you're a sex offender, right? If you're under 13 years old, you're not supposed to be on Facebook. Don't share your password, like we said before, right? You have to use your real name. What you can share stuff that violates the community standards. These community standards are weird, though. Very, very weird. Very weird. I've seen people do some serious bullying, and it's okay. And then people reported me just for stating my opinion on certain things. And I get this big, you violated our policy. Right. To upload viruses, etc., right? So that's the terms of use. And that's your responsibilities of the customers while using the system, right? All right, very good. People, that's all I have for you today. Now I'm gonna have to edit this thing very heavily, take out all those parts. that I didn't want to talk about. All right. See me if you need attendance. Oh, by the way, if you go and see this movie, Amaran, you were there? You were in the theater? If you watch that movie, be prepared to cry your eyes out. It's very sad at the end.
Yeah, I heard everyone crying at that.
Everybody was crying?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was too much. Oh! Yeah. You went and you cried? You cried?
No, I stopped watching. Oh, it's
Oh, right.
yeah. This one, okay.
What I mean?
This was plus size tea.
Is what?
Plus size tea. It's called
Plus size?
plus size. One size higher than what you wear. If you wear a
No,
small,
I'm
you should wear medium.
I'm XL though, you know. I'm XL. Small as you say, I'm XL.
But I have a hard time finding minus size.
Yeah?
I was just kidding. There wasn't any minus size tea. It was on plus size.
What you guys up to? You guys wearing up your block today?
Are you happy, Professor? Yesterday?
Am I what?
Are you happy yesterday?
Happy? Yes.
Because the election was done. Trump won again.
Oh, was I happy?
Yeah.
Oh, did I tell you I'm not going to talk about elections? Why do you think I'm about to talk about elections?
You previously mentioned that you are happy that it was all over, right?
Oh, what? No, man. I think you might have misinterpreted something I said. I think you misinterpreted.
I have paraphrased your opinion, right?
No, I think you misinterpreted.